Welcome back to another episode of Think Global Do Justice, and Happy New Year. This is the first episode that we are releasing in the month of January, so happy 2025 to our listeners out there. And I don't think there's a better way for us to start off the new year than with recording that I get to do live, which is exciting for me. So my co-host and friend Phil Dark is not with me today, but I am joined by a global leader, a nonprofit leader that's actually based in the same area as me. So always great to do live recordings in the Pacific Northwest. So Medard, welcome to the show. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing good. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So as you guys have heard in the intro already, I am joined today by Medard Ngueita, who is the Executive Director at World Relief Western Washington, doing really important work here in the Puget Sound region and beyond. And we're going to get into a lot of conversation. So Medard, thanks for joining me, man.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me over.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me over. We are actually getting to do this recording here at the World Relief office, and you guys have been so hospitable and again, just doing incredible work. Maybe we could just start there. Medard, just introduce yourself a little bit to our audience and, just kind of share what's the type of work that you guys are doing here at World Relief Western Washington.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Again, Medard Ngueita here with you. I'm the Executive Director of World Relief Western Washington, and World Relief Western Washington is part of the humanitarian organization World Relief, which is a Christian organization that works across the world, here in the United States as well as in some other countries. And as an organization, our mission is to engage in the global crisis in partnership with the church. And so as we do so in Western Washington, our vision within that is to see every refugee and immigrant who's coming into this region to be welcomed by community, rooted in community, and empowered for community. And so we get the privilege to let God use us as pieces and tools to accomplish His will as refugees and immigrants come into our community.
That's awesome. So Medard, we're going to dive into all the ins and outs. Our listeners are already aware. We're going to kind of be talking about, the prospects for refugee resettlement in 2025 and just kind of this maybe every 4-year switch around some of the policies and what that does to organizations that are doing impact like you guys are. But before we do, we have this question that we ask everyone. So why do you think it's important for Christians to not only think about their own families and their own communities, but also consider the needs of people globally and other communities outside of their own?
Christians should understand that the world is bigger than ourselves. Individually, it's bigger than our families, and it is also bigger than our communities. It is that much large. And what a privilege to call ourselves a Christian, knowing that God calls us into loving our neighbors, which again, it takes us to the question of who is my neighbor, right? And your neighbor isn't the person that you know. It's not only your family. Your neighbor is everybody else that is a human being created to God's image. And they may not be in your community. They may not be in your city, but they can be across the world. And that's our calling as Christians. I do recall, how God reminded the children of Israel that in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 19, that remember, you yourself were once a foreigner in the land of Egypt, and therefore, when you have other people around with you, you should be showing them love and kindness. And that also, as we look in Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, Paul is calling the Philippians to let their gentleness shown as people who love God with other people, to all people, and that means it is not just our family. Thinking global and doing justice is something that we do wherever we are. Our world has become just a village, right? Yeah. And that village means it can be anywhere. And so we are all citizens of the world, and therefore loving and having kindness for each one is a calling for us as Christians.
I love that, and I love the allusion to the Old Testament scriptures as well, because I think we as humans have a propensity to forget. We have a propensity to forget what God has done for us and ways that He has worked in our lives. And really, when we see His kindness and when we see the way that He's directed us, it should give us empathy so that we would do the same for other people. So I think that was the story of Israel as they sojourned and went into lands that they were not native to, and yet God said, well, remember when you were carried off. So, that of course brings up an interesting story, and would love to kind of dive into your specific journey. So you guys are working here, you guys are working with asylum seekers, you guys are working with refugees, lots of different nations that are that you guys are serving, as well as even nations represented within your guys' team and your own staff here at World Relief Western Washington, and you are no exception in that regard. So you have a unique journey because you are a former asylum seeker yourself, came from Central Africa. So maybe we would love to just kind of hear some of your own story as somebody who sought asylum and are now an important part within our own American society.
Yeah, Brandon, I take that question with a lot of humility, knowing that I work here at World Relief Western Washington as a servant leader to our organization and to the community and to refugees and immigrants who are coming. And so it's really a humbling privilege for me. Our team is composed of 17 countries, different countries around the world, and we do have 18 languages spoken in our organization. And that, again, is another level of humility that we do have to be doing this work over here. And you got it right. I myself once was an asylum seeker. I came to the United States in 2006 seeking political asylum because of my own opinions and judgment of our government and things, and that has gotten me into trouble where persecution has begun for me. And I thank God for opening the door for me to flee that persecution and to find myself here in the United States with my family, and to be welcomed by the very community that we now call our home. And that goes back into that idea of seeing every refugee and immigrant be welcomed by the community and rooted in the community and then empowered for the community. It is through that those steps that I am today empowered to be serving the very community that welcomed me in the very first place. Yeah. I feel so privileged to be doing what I'm doing, and so thankful for the community that welcomed me, and I hope that we continue as a community to see it as a calling for all of us to welcome, to serve, and to create a space of integration for our newcomers, our new neighbors into the community.
When I think about West Africa or East Africa or Central Africa, or just, when I think about where we often see people come from sub-Saharan Africa, I know there's a lot of Congolese refugees because of what's happened in Eastern Congo. You might see a lot of people that have certain acumen that move here and find jobs, Kenyans and so forth that I run into. But when we talk about an asylum seeker from Chad, I'm not running into that particular nation a whole lot. So what does that look like? Because sometimes we'll see, large groups, of course, and we'll talk about some of them here: Ukrainians, Afghan, I assume maybe Syrians in the recent past. But what was that like for you coming from Chad, where it wasn't necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, there weren't droves necessarily of people coming from that particular country. So what kind of led that for you specifically?
Chad has always been that resilient country, even though a country that has always been in war. And you're right that there aren't that many people from Chad, particularly in this region of Western Washington. But when you go to the eastern side of the country of the United States, or you go down south or in the central part of the country, you will be seeing a lot of Chadians over there as well. And Chad, again, like I said, is a country that has always been in wars, and the leaders there aren't open to opinions that are different than theirs. Mm-hmm. Criticizing your own government is not something that the government takes it lightly, and so it has caused so many Chadians to leave. It's just that the region where we are, there aren't that many Chadians. Western Washington, if not the western part of the country, is little far from Africa, and so maybe that's one of the regions. But also because there are communities already built in the other part of the country of the United States, many Chadians who come over here are instead on that side.
They end up over there. Oh, okay. Well, see, there you go. So maybe some of our listeners that are on the other side of the country think there's Chadians everywhere. I mean, maybe it's just not me. One of the things that you alluded to is, the type of people that you guys are resettling here. So I would love to kind of hear, who are some of those people groups that you find yourself you and your team working a lot with in Western Washington, and what are those situations that they are coming out of to then, land in Western Washington?
We do work with people from all over the world. When you look at the map, in each part of the continents around the world, you will see that we get people from those different continents and exactly, countries within those continents. Our offices in Western Washington are currently resettling predominantly people from Afghanistan. Now, the United States had been in Afghanistan for years, fighting there, and then with that, all the Afghans who were involved with the U.S. government or the U.S. Embassy were given the opportunity to be resettled in the United States because of their association with the government. Mm-hmm. Their lives have been threatened, and so they come under what we call the special immigrant visa, but they are also qualified for all the refugee benefits when they get here. So because we have that pipeline for years resettling them, they are currently our predominant groups. But we also see people from Ukraine, people from Sudan, people from Central and South America that are coming through as well. And to your question, what caused those different people to come? In case of Afghans, who are our predominant nationality right now, it's their association with the U.S. Embassy, which led their country to see them as traitors who associate themselves with enemies. But then when you look at right now, the ongoing war in Ukraine, which has displaced so many people from Ukraine, is also a cause for us to see many Ukrainians coming. But we've been seeing also a handful of people from places like Sudan, which shares border with so many other countries, including my own country. Over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, it has driven out almost 12 million forcibly displaced people. Some of them are still internally displaced, but some are in other countries like Egypt being the first country that is hosting people from Sudan right now, and Chad, my own country, almost 1 million people from Sudan are refugees in Chad as we're speaking. And so some of those people are coming through, and we've been seeing them, and all of that is caused by the greed of the people in power in those different countries, who either don't want to leave the country, or because people are having different opinion than what they are doing and criticizing them for wanting to see their country be in a better place, and they don't take it well, and so they start persecuting their own people and driving them out. When it comes to mass displacement, it's not a happy thing for anybody to leave their home country.
Of course.
When we're talking about the fear of being persecuted, when you live through it, you understand how hard it is to constantly, day in, day out, to think about you being killed by someone. And the story of baby Jesus, teaches us that thing. When baby Jesus was born, when the Magi came over and they spoke with King Herod, King Herod has decided to kill all the babies 2 years and less. And so Jesus and his earthly parents had to flee and end up in Egypt, where they stayed until King Herod died before they returned. And even when they returned, they did not go to Galilee, because they found out that the son of King Herod was the king, and therefore they went to Nazareth. That's where they even though they came back, they did not go to Galilee, because they are still in that mode of fear and trying to save their lives. And so it's not a fun thing to just leave your country and make to all those miles, sometimes in a very precarious situations, dealing with walking in the deserts and without water and things, to find a place that would create the safety and a welcoming place for you.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that there's some? So, for example, I was recently you and I just met together here, and we were walking around, and we ended up talking. I met somebody from a country in the Himalayas, a country that I visited several years ago, and I told her I have not ever met somebody on this side from that country, and because it's a close country, I won't actually say where specifically it is, but but she said, oh yeah, there was a time where there were multiple people coming from this Himalayan country. Are there some of those other ones like Afghanistan, Ukraine, even Sudan? These are some of those conflicts and things that we've been following and talking about. Are there any like other countries where you're seeing people come from that are maybe kind of flying under the radar? Maybe there's not a lot of them, but maybe some that maybe people are unaware of?
Definitely, yes. And that's the reality of refugee resettlement. When people leave their home countries as refugees, there are three priorities that come with it. The first priority is the hope that their country can be safe again so that they can return back to their country.
Yeah.
So that's the priority number one. Priority number two is that if the country is not safe and they continue to live in that second country that welcomed them, the hope is that they can get an opportunity to be integrated within those countries. And so they keep on waiting, which again translate into how many years people spend in the refugee camps. And so you would still be seeing people from those countries that for many, many years have been persecuted. The population had been persecuted, and people left and are still in the refugee camp. Some of them are still coming. It's just that they don't come in a huge number like it used to be, but definitely resettlement is just the third priority.
Right.
And that's also a reality that people need to understand, that refugees, when they leave their home country, their hope is that their country will become safe for them to return. Priority number one. Priority number two is that the welcoming country can be hospitable enough, but also have structure enough for them to integrate. And if that doesn't work, then resettlement is looked at. Most of the countries where people are fleeing, when they leave their country, they end up in the neighboring countries, which are themselves not safe countries to start with, and there are less opportunities, and therefore people start staying in those refugee camps for years without a clear picture for the future.
Yeah, I think, and that's something that we don't always take into account, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you know better than me, but I think it's something like the average time that somebody spends forcibly displaced in a refugee camp is something like 18 years on average or something. Like it's an exceptional amount of time. So to kind of put, a fine point on that, that's like, there's been multiple conflicts in Sudan, of course the current one, but in previous years this meant, seeking refuge in northern Kenya, and they would just be camped out in northern Kenya, which is not a very habitable area of the continent, and they would just be there for essentially an entire childhood, upwards of 2 decades on average. So yes, that's a helpful kind of framing. As we kind of think about some of these different situations, you came here in the mid 2000s. Can you maybe just kind of do some compare and contrast, maybe between your own story and then some of those kind of more regular or common stories of people that are seeking asylum in the States currently? Like, what are some similarities? What are some differences if you kind of like take a 20-year swath from like when you came to what it looks like currently? Yeah,
that's actually a great question. Refugees, as well as people seeking asylum, are people who flee a well-feared funded persecution. So, they have been persecuted. They leave their home country with the hope that they can find a place that they can run away from that persecution. Now, those persecutions can be just, due to wars in their country, due to their political opinions, due to their affiliation with some social groups, or just because they have some religious beliefs that their own countries don't agree with them on. And so those categories can make the difference, but the bottom line is that there is a well-founded fear of persecution within their country, which caused them to leave. Right. And so all of us as asylees or asylum seekers or refugees coming, we are different with what are our base of that persecution. The fear of that persecution can differ. Now, we have been through different administrations, and time changed as well, and so our experience, different depending on the different times that we come into the country, would differ as well as we begin that life of integration in our new communities. We have, when I came in 2006, seeking political asylum, on this side there aren't that many asylum seekers. Now these days there are many more than what I can realize or can remember at that time when I came. Also, with the recent events going on in Central and South America, let's take just the example of Venezuela, right?
Right, which is significant right now.
Which is really significant right now. What's going on in Venezuela has driven out almost 8 million of Venezuelans out of Venezuela. And some of them are here in our community seeking that same protection, seeking asylum, and so with the hope that asylum can be granted to them so that they can live a peaceful life, but also a safe life, rebuilding the community and rebuilding their own lives in our community. And while all of that is heartbreaking and we shouldn't be taking it lightly, we as organization feel very humbled when we can meet someone at the door and tell them that we are here and we will be walking alongside you together with the church and the community, and getting them connected into the community, getting them to find some new friends, getting them to to know where they can go to church or to the groceries. Those things are very humbling for us to be a tiny bit a part of that rebuilding hope in the people that are coming into the community.
Yeah, and I think the Latin American piece I think is really significant because one of the things that we're aware of with the refugees or asylum seekers, I should say, that are coming from Venezuela, I remember not too long ago, the kind of surge in asylum seeking was from the Northern Triangle, so those countries being Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and that was really substantial, and that was under the first Trump administration. And what's interesting, for me, a lot of my work within global development spaces has been within the orphan care space, and one of the things that we talk a lot about is the challenges that are presented by family separation. And this was a word that we were just using like all the time within orphan care. Like, how do we mitigate, how do we prevent family separation? Even working in domestic foster care here in Western Washington, we talk about how can we preserve families, how can we prevent family separation. So now we take those two words, family separation, and we then, during the first Trump administration, and I am intentionally turning this page, those two words started to be applied to policies that were put in place by the Trump administration as a way to, I guess, dissuade people from seeking to enter the country. There were other policies that were also in place, such as Remain in Mexico, and some of these other policies that were put in place during the first Trump administration. As obviously this is releasing in January 2025, as everyone's more than aware, the incoming president is President-elect Trump. And while we don't always talk politics on the show, I do think that it's pertinent. So a few acknowledgments. There's going to be people that are listening that voted for President Trump. That's fine. Everybody has their democratic thing. I voted third party, so I'll just make that very clear, as my listeners have heard me many times. I did vote third party. But President-elect Trump, had some very strong statements concerning immigrants and refugees. Maybe, and we also kind of saw, what that looked like from 2016 to 2020 when he was in office. So I would love to kind of, maybe we just kind of start this. Maybe you can just kind of provide an overview maybe of what some of those statements have been as far as like your own team who works regularly with immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. What have been some of those things that have been said, and then what would you kind of assess from your own understanding as some of those potential implications for those that are seeking asylum or immigrants that are looking to integrate into American society? What are you guys kind of seeing and thinking through?
Yeah, before I answer that question, let me make this point clear to our listeners that World Relief as an organization, we are a non-partisan organization.
Of course, yeah.
We don't root for any political party. but we do stand for policies that are right with our beliefs and with what we're fighting for.
Right.
And so I just wanted to make that clarification. And again, to your point, everybody has their own opinion when it comes to political decisions and who they vote for. And at the end of the day, we have a president-elect Trump. And as believers, we are called to be respectful to our leaders, earthly leaders, and to pray for them so that God can give them a heart that cares for other people in our community.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what we're doing. But in terms of policies, that's where the difference will come. Any policy that does not stand for the right and the dignity of refugees and immigrants, we're going to be speaking about it. And President-elect Trump, over the during the campaign trail, said some of the things that would impact directly the work that myself and my team are doing here in Western Washington to support refugees and immigrants. We have heard things about mass deportation, which again, to your point earlier, family separation. We don't know how that will be rolled out this time around in terms of policies, if they will be separating families or if they will be deporting families altogether, so children with parents. That's left up to be known once January 20th comes and we start seeing the policies roll out. We also have heard things about the possibility of shutting down the refugee resettlement altogether. So the resettlement programs being shut down, that means probably no refugee arrivals. And we have seen that under President-elect first term. When he became president in 2017, elected in 2016, but then in office in 2017, January 2017. That last year, the president that was in office, President Obama, signed a presidential determination ceiling at 100,000 refugees for that year. And maybe an opportunity here to do a little bit of a clarification for our listeners.
Sure.
Every year, the President of the United States has the full power, kind of a unilateral power that was given through the laws to define how many refugees they want to admit through the refugee processing. And so President Obama, on his last year, set it at 100,000. And President Trump came in and cut it to 45,000 on that very first year. But we have seen less than 22,000 people that actually ended up coming. And so because that is a full power that he has, he can decide to change that as well. Again, as of now, we haven't seen the policies roll out other than the campaign trail talks that we have heard. Also, some of the statements on the social medias that were posted. So with that, we're also looking at a drastic funding cut that would come from the public, so either from the federal government or from the federal government to the local governments that come to support refugees and immigrants. We're looking at all those things being possibilities, and therefore a greater change in the way that we do business, in the way that we welcome our new neighbors into the community. But again, we're waiting to see what policies will be actually rolled out. But definitely based on the talks on the campaign trails and some of the posting on social medias, we're expecting some drastic changes in the way that we welcome people.
Yeah, that's interesting. When we think about it from a policy standpoint, you mentioned President Obama, who obviously preceded the first Trump administration. There were, even within the Western Hemisphere and some of these countries in our own continent, there were accords and there were different arrangements that were kind of put into place that were not fully enacted. And there's kind of this more broad policy set from international law, which is the Protocol on Refugees, which was 1960, what was that? It's in the 1960s. I can't remember.
So the convention, the Refugee Convention, was in 1951.
Okay, yes.
That's when UN defined even who is a refugee and what is a refugee.
Right. Yes. Okay, so that was 51, and then I know there was a protocol, I think in 67 as well, that was related to it. But when you look at these policies, which the United States is party to, I know there's kind of a overall like a nationalist kind of sentiment around the world right now. Obviously, we see that within the United States. We see that even in the UK with Brexit. To be honest, even the president that was in office when I left Tanzania was also nationalist. Like, you kind of see that cropping up. I just kind of have this quandary in my head, and I don't even know if there's a question in here, but when we think about some of these international law agreements that we come to, and how we define things. So like even as you were defining like these are the criteria essentially for like being able to receive refugee status, right? Fleeing persecution and like some of that type of verbiage. Those are things that we've been party to for decades, and yet we kind of keep getting this kind of like big jerk as we go from like one president to the next. It just, I don't know, I think it just calls for hopefully something that would be a little more consistent in terms of our American approach to helping our global neighbors. We've alluded to some of the kind of previous track record around what some of those policies are. Maybe you could just kind of speak to it. So we already alluded to the family separation policy that was put into place, the Remain in Mexico policy that was put into place previously. We don't know if those will be the policies that are enacted, starting later this month from time of release. But maybe we could at least do a quick little autopsy, so to speak, looking at those 4 years when he was previously in office. What were the ramifications of the Trump administration's, anti-immigration policies, if we could call them that, because it was a swing against immigration? How would you describe some of those like ramifications of those?
Yeah, and again, to your point, we're yet to see what this time around some of those policies would look like. We talked about a possibility of shutting down the refugee resettlement programs, and in the first time around when President-elect Trump was in office, there were things like the travel ban, which we alluded to sometimes as a Muslim ban, right? And so some countries, Muslim countries, were not allowed to come under the refugee processing, and so there are things like that we're looking at. And given that, again, presidents of the United States have been given through the law a kind of a unilateral power of decision making in terms of the presidential ceiling that they would have to put. That also would be a way of keeping refugees out of this country. Whereas, let's be clear about people who are coming in the United States as refugees are the most vetted people entering this country ever. Yeah. That has been proven, and it is the reality. When people are coming with other types of visa, work visa or education visa for their, universities and things, or diversity and lottery visas, all of those visas, when you take them all together, refugees are the most vetted people entering this country. Right. And so we have to be clear on that and not to throw some blanket on it that they are part of everybody else that we want to keep out. But also, let's remind each of us on something. Our diversity is what makes us a strong country. United States is the leading power on the world because of the immigrants and refugees coming into this country. Yeah. And that is that's a truth that we should not be shying away from repeating and from reminding ourselves on. The kingdom of God wouldn't look like just one individual, one type of people, or one race, or one gender. No, it will be all of us, and that's where celebration will come from. And what a privilege do we as a nation on the earth to be the nation that welcomes more people and creating more of that diversity. Can the United States be that Egypt for baby Christ, especially in this season, right? For baby Christ, to welcome him with his parents as he fled persecution, the person of Christ who was going to become the savior of the world to run, and a country welcoming him. Can we have that opportunity to be that Egypt for people who are fleeing persecution? Those are conversations that we definitely need to have as a nation, and to open our eyes and to hold on that middle courageous tension where we know that everybody would have different opinions, and to respect those different opinions, but also to say the truth in between those opinions by being kind to each other, not just being nice, but being kind to each other, so that we reveal those truths to each other as we go about this next round of President-elect Trump.
Yeah. As the leader of a refugee resettlement organization, and kind of understanding what those potential policies are and the talks around mass deportation and some of those things that have been said, I think if I take a sober analysis of President Trump, sometimes it seems that he just says things just to say things, and they don't get enacted, and then other times they do, right? And sometimes he's a very skilled politician, and he uses means of communication that are at times unorthodox. So it can be hard to project, right, in terms of what is this actually going to look like. So obviously with this releasing, after the election but before the inauguration, there's still question marks that we're all thinking through. But for you as a leader within a refugee resettlement organization, what preparations are you having to make, considering potential implications that we've been describing or that we saw from his first term? How are you guys kind of making preparations? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's Brandon. That's definitely a great question, and I think maybe as a reminder to our listeners as well, the current administration, so Biden's administration, for this fiscal year FY25, which is from October to September, they have set the presidential determination sitting at 125,000 refugees that they wanted to bring into the country. Now, that effort is really being deployed to make sure that they bring as many people as they can. And so my team and myself, our organization as a whole, has seen a spike into the arrivals. For the next few weeks until the inauguration, based on that commitment to bring in that many refugees, we have seen an increase of about 30% of our normal arrivals per week. And so my team and I have been working tirelessly on the ground. Of course, we couldn't have done it without the community. And so we have churches that are coming forward and opening up their homes, people opening up their homes to provide a temporary stay, so becoming host homes for our families. But also in the same time, as we alluded to earlier, there is a lot that is up in the air that we don't know. Because things can change once January 20th comes. We know for sure that they will change on a negative side of the things for us working with refugees and immigrants. And with that in mind, I had people reaching out and asking, so does that mean you wouldn't have work to do? Actually, we will have more work to do. Right. More work on standing strong together with our refugees and immigrant communities in our own community. That will require us being there day in and day out. We will have a lot of work because there are families who have been arriving for years and they are part of this very community. They will need, in the midst of the fear of everything that would be said about them or the policies that will impact them, they will need somebody to stand there and tell them that I got your back. We are in this together. That will require a lot of time of all of us to be a part of it. And so we're preparing for that. We're preparing to see ways by which we can raise enough money to keep our doors open, because federal funding, we expect them to be cut. And if the federal funds are cut, then we would solely rely on our community, our church supports, our individuals and the foundations in the community to keep on pouring in not only their volunteer time and their donations, in-kind donations to support the work, but also the financial support, because we'll need to keep our team to be able to work alongside those families as we figure out what kind of policy is being rolled out, how would it affect us. But in that time of unknown and uncertainty, we need to keep our staff as we figure things out. And so it's a delicate place to be in as a leader, because you cannot strategically plan something and say that this is going to happen this way. Right. So it's a very challenging time for us right now as we prepare for the next 4 years or so and waiting to see what kind of policies will be rolled out. And in the meantime, we've been having conversations with people in the community when it comes to advocacy. As I said, God is the one who raises leaders, and He's the one who deposits leaders as well. And for that, He calls us to pray for them. So we're asking people to pray for our leaders. If they know people in the circle of President-elect Trump, to have those conversations with them, those courageous conversations, so that the decisions are more humane as we move forward, so that policies are hold that dignity of the human beings and the human, created to the image of God that we all are, so that we see that humanity in each other and that we have compassion for each other as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And, I think healthy organizations will have, a diversity of revenue streams and models. And I do think that because our whole nonprofit space is, largely set up to often meet needs that the government is saying, hey, these are entitled, needs that we recognize our nonprofit partners are going to be actually better positioned to carry out some of these services, right? That's kind of like the undergirding of the nonprofit space in general. So having those government contracts is a really great way as at least one, part of the revenue model to expand and be able to reach more people. So that's really significant. Would it be accurate to say that during the first Trump administration, I don't know about World Relief specifically, but refugee resettlement, ministries and organizations, at least in general, that they were diminished, that they were potentially had to close down. Did that happen during the first Trump administration?
Yes, it did happen during the first Trump's administration because some of the refugee resettlements are only doing refugee resettlement.
Right.
Whereas when you take Western Washington, and this is something that we pride ourselves for because we don't see refugee resettlement as just the first 90 days, the 3 months that the government funds.
Right.
Refugee resettlement is a process of integration, and it takes therefore longer than that. And so what are other wraparound services that can provide a holistic support to the families as they rebuild that sense of life? And if that's true, then we know it's more than 3 months. And so we have other programs that support people. We have our ILS, which is the Immigration and Legal Services Department that help people to do some status adjustment down the road. We have our Children and Family Department that works with families to understand the American school system and how do you support your kids as a newcomer into this community so that they can succeed. Those are programs that are mainly funded through our the privately raised funds that we get a chance to be doing. And those programs have grown under Trump's administration, first round around. Okay. But this time around, I think we have a great opportunity because we know we have an idea what can happen, even though again yet to be seen. From the first term, we are better positioned to prepare ourselves better. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, we're working with our volunteers, with the churches, with the community to educate them and where the needs would be within those first couple of months as we figure out what policies will actually be rolled out. We are definitely at a better place. And for some who would ask the question, will there be work for us? Definitely we do have work for us because there will be work for us. We have been under different administrations and they change. Some have, some stand for refugees and immigrants, some don't. And in terms of our funding mechanism, the United States government is the only one who brings refugees into the United States. Sure. And with that being said, they have contracts with organizations like ours to be able to provide that service. And therefore, we are obligated to work with the government to be able to get the funding to help families resettle over here. But because that funds can change on a regular basis as administrations change, we continue to put in effort in educating people and letting them know what is about this noble cause that we're up about and how they can join us so that God can move within our community as we welcome our new neighbors.
Yeah, that's really helpful and good to kind of have a more expansive view. I mean, if I were to think like, okay, moving to a new country, especially when you're fleeing conflict or whatever it was that's behind you, to have to resettle within 90 days is just almost, it's laughable to think that would even be possible. So I love the model that you guys employ here to go beyond that. And certainly one of the enabling factors that help you guys with your work that really is excellent is your collaboration and partnership with churches, which is specific to World Relief in terms of like how you guys are working with refugees here, but also with some of the stuff that you guys do internationally in other countries, right? Mm-hmm. So what is something that, as we have a number of people that are listening that are Christians or a part of churches, what's something that they could do to help, ministries like World Relief in times like this?
The services that we do provide either here or internationally cannot happen without church, and that's why our mission is to engage the world's greatest crisis in partnership with the church, to serve people in vulnerable situations. And it is also important for us as believers to know that our weapon is the prayer. And so the first and most important thing that we always ask churches to do is to pray for the work that we're doing, and to consider partnering with us, because it is important. It is a way of living out the calling of a church, to welcoming the strangers and to create space for the sojourners. And so I think it aligns with who we are in terms of our belief as Christians. But I also do think that praying for our leaders is key into this as well, because God can change hearts. Yeah. Even when somebody is ready with that pen to strike a signature on any sort of a policy, God can change things in that moment. And so we also believe in the transformation that can happen when we cry out to God with supplications and with thanksgiving, that things can change. We're not naive that it may not change, but our calling is to stay on that attitude of prayer for the hope for God to bring fruit into our faithfulness towards Him. What is also needed, especially for us here in Western Washington, like I said, we are our number of arrivals have increased by about 30% of our normal weekly arrival. And so we need some more host homes. We need volunteers to help with airport pickups until we get to that other side. But also it is important for the churches to put us on their budget line. It is important as God provides through the blessings for them to extend those blessings towards the organizations like ours as we continue serving together for the kingdom here on the earth, and to be the lights and in the darkness, and to be the salt and in our communities.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And just to even kind of put a fine point on that, one of the I just know from our audience that our downloads in the US are higher than any other country. So I know there's a lot of Americans that are listening to this particular episode. And one of the cool things, especially as someone who has lived internationally, has actually been having the opportunity to interact with people that have recently come to the States. And sometimes they don't even speak English. I mean, I remember some of the times when I would travel back and forth between East Africa and the West Coast here, running into people. I remember very distinctly running into a family of Congolese people, and they were being received at a changeover in Amsterdam, and they were being received by some guy who didn't speak French. Thankfully, they also spoke Swahili.
Yeah.
But being able to be in that situation as someone who does speak Swahili and be able to provide, just some connection, and they're always kind of like, oh, a white guy that speaks Swahili.
Yeah.
But having those types of connections in contexts that you're not accustomed to them, like in the West, is really powerful. Our church was able to minister to a Ukrainian family and help them with some of their tangible needs recently, and getting to interact with that mom and help her out with some of her real-time needs. I mean, these people are in our communities, not just here in the greater Seattle area, but certainly in a lot of the communities where people are listening. And when you get an opportunity to do the type of stuff that Medard is describing, helping them with a ride, hosting, families that are in need, these are not just profound ways for us to exemplify God's love to our global neighbor, but they're also fun, and they're enjoyable, and they're interesting because you're getting to meet people that you wouldn't otherwise. So I would definitely encourage our listeners, look up to see if World Relief or another refugee ministry is at work in your community, because I think this is a time, it's a time of opportunity as well. We can, I know I had my own challenges, qualms, if you will, with the previous Trump administration, and in terms of this space specifically around immigration and all of that. But the reality is God's in control, God's in charge, and He's our King. So there's opportunities for us, and even for organizations like your guys's that's been around for 80 years, 4 years from now, you guys are still going to be doing God's work,
Absolutely.
and we thank God for that. So, yeah, there's so much opportunity. So, yeah, this is great.
Yeah, and to that point, Brandon, I can agree with you more because the work that we do, we always call it a transformative relationship work.
Yeah.
When a volunteer from the welcoming community is opened up to welcome a volunteer who is entering into the community, there is something that happened. You know, God has purposefully made us for relationships, and as He does, as we all do know, He gifted and equipped each of us differently so that we can rely on each other, so that we can learn something from each other. What an opportunity do we have to see people coming with different cultures and to interact with them and to discover how great it is and to humble ourselves to learn something while they also learn something from us. A funny story. I, as you know, I did not grow up in this country. I did not come as a teenager, therefore I haven't been to high school in this country.
Okay.
And last year, my son turned 17. So, you know, over 17 years in the United States, I had no idea there is something called coming home, or is it homecoming? No, homecoming.
Yeah, homecoming. Yeah.
So my son was talking about it and he was so stressed, and I'm like, what is really going on here?
Right.
And so I asked him and he explained, but I still didn't get it. So I had to talk to some of the people that, you know, friends in the community.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about this coming home thing, what it is.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, moments like that can happen as some of the families come with kids who are going straight to high school.
Right.
And they may need those cultural companions, those friends within the community, and you can be one of those, you know, friends to the families and to help them acclimate into the realities of the things, but also to approach it with less stress. And in those moments, there is a transformation that happens. And so we have a great opportunity to serve people of God in our own communities, on our own neighborhoods and backyards.
That's so good. Yeah, and I think that probably lends itself very well to the final question that we ask everybody that comes on the show. I think we've already learned so much in terms of things that we could be doing when it comes to refugee resettlement, but even more broadly, what is one, if somebody is looking to get into the work of Christian global justice type of work, what's one thing that you would recommend that they do?
That's a very profound question. There is so much that they can do. There is definitely so much that they can do. But before even trying to do something, I think one reality that we should all be embracing is the concept of humility. Because when you're getting into the work of resettlement, when you're working with people that are different than you, different culture, different habits, unless you wear that clothes of humility, it would be challenging. And so go into it with the fact that you are going to discover your own self as you discover somebody else that you will be walking alongside. I think this is a great time for all of us to, if there is something that the church can do as we watch what is coming up through the policies that will be rolled out, we ask people to speak into that. Read your Bible. What does the Bible tell you about your neighbors? And what you're reading on the documents that are being rolled out, is this something that God will ask you to do? If not, challenge those things. To speak up your mind and stand for the right of people that are coming into this country, especially for the work that we're doing. We are called to embrace our neighbors, and your neighbor isn't necessarily, as we start off, isn't your family or the person who has the house next to you. It can be somebody from anywhere, and those are your neighbors. And Christ was able to paint that clearly for us through the story of the Good Samaritan, where a stranger had to give up everything and to care for somebody on the side of the street, on the side of the road, who isn't even somebody from his culture. And so this is the moment for us to live up to that calling and to be the lights in our communities. And so I would call the church, if there is one specific thing that they can do until we get there. Again, prayer is one key thing, but also to reach out and to make themselves available in different ways that they can support and help. We all have been gifted and talented differently according to God's will, and therefore there is something about every single one of us to do in light of the challenge that we're looking at.
Yeah, no, that is a good word, and a good place to wrap the podcast, Medard. Thank you so much for hosting me, not only at your guys' offices here at World Relief Western Washington, but for the really important work that you and your team are doing. So thank you.
Thank you also for the great work that you're doing, using your platform to share this news and the challenges with the community, so that they are educated, but also so that they see the opportunities of where God is calling them into this. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share on all of this.
Amen. Thanks,
Yeah.
brother.
Yeah.
And so to our listeners and to our friends, may Almighty God, who created us in his own image, grant us grace to fearlessly contend against evil and to make no peace with oppression, that we may reverently use our freedom and employ it in the maintenance of justice in our communities and among the nations. To the glory of God's holy name, through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And we will get you guys on the next episode of Think Global, Do Justice.
Amen.